Today, I want to talk about the world of pressure fermentation and mead making specifically. So let's get started. So as someone who's gotten into kegging and force carbonating meads, I have been able to open my doors to the option of pressure fermentation. Now, you don't have to do this in a keg. You could do this in any container that can actually hold pressure for fermentation. The vessels like the Fermzillas and many others have this capability. However, as I've found, kegging and pressure fermentation go very well together. I've been pretty excited about this idea because I wanted to do this with a lager. Now, lagering is generally the process of bringing down your yeast to a colder temperature and going through a fermentation process. There's a thing called a diacetyl rest, which is something that happens at the end, but lagering is generally just that lower temp fermentation, which means you have to have the ability to ferment at a lower temp in a vessel like a fridge or something like that. Not super easy. In today's video, we're doing a pseudo lager using Kveik Lutra. Kveik Lutra is one of those really versatile yeast that's intended for some lagering ideas, aspects, aka why it's called a pseudo lager, but you don't have to lager it, or you don't have to ferment at the lower temperature. The range of the Kveik Lutra is actually higher. It's closer to room temp, which is kind of interesting. So what we're doing is we're using that yeast with honey and water and doing all that and basically making a traditional mead that has been pseudo lagered. I'm doing this at a lower ABV, meaning like 4.5%, because I'm really more into that kind of style of mead right now. The 4.5 is like crushable. You can have a whole pint glass of that, or 2 or 3, whereas the higher ABV stuff is harder to get through. Right now in my current mead making world, I am way more into low ABV stuff because I want to drink more of that mead. For the stuff that's normal strength, 8, 9, 10 plus, if I drink more than an ounce, I'm like, I don't really care all that much. So I want to drink more of the low ABV, which that's what this is today. So in order to do this, like I said, you need a vessel you can pressure ferment in. And specifically, I used some kegs. Now, I am using this claw hammer keg you see right here. Very, very nice keg in system. And these guys make some quality stuff, but you don't have to have this claw hammer keg. You can actually use just a normal keg. I've pressure fermented in kegs like this before. This is just a corny keg, 5-gallon corny keg. What you do have to have is a way to actually stave off the pressure. So we're gonna be using a spunding valve. And I'll put a link to an Amazon link below, but a spunding valve is something that has a pressure gauge on it. This goes on the gas valve, and as the pressure builds up in your keg, it goes into here, goes to a certain point, and you're able to release pressure via this little spinning part, or this valve. We're gonna be pressure fermenting at about 13 or 14 PSI, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, you're gonna get whatever honey you have. You're gonna start mixing up your honey and water because I'm doing a super low ABV one. I did 1 pound of honey per gallon. So this was a 5-gallon batch with 5 pounds of honey. And I'll put a recipe card up for you to follow, but it's a very, very simple mead. This is an orange blossom mead for this one. So we mixed up our honey and our water. I had some previously used Kveik Lutra that I had used for an actual pseudo lager itself. It was like a beer, and I just kept some of the yeast slurry. So I went ahead and added that yeast slurry into the orange blossom little must base that I had there, which was all put into a keg. I'll remind you that. We then sealed up the keg with all the clamps and all the things on this claw hammer keg and put on our spunding valve. I did throw one more thing in there that's optional, of course, and that is I threw in a tilt hydrometer so that I could watch and see where the fermentation was. You don't have to do this necessarily, but it does help if you want to know and monitor your fermentation speed. Once you put your spunding valve on, I spun it up until it was, about halfway. And generally what I did, or what I do, is within the first 12 to 24 hours, I go back and look at it pretty constantly to see how pressurized it is. We don't want the pressure to get above like 20 realistically. So go and check it out. Make sure that your pressure is getting to where you want, 13 or 14 in this case, and then go ahead and spin it to where the pressure is released until it stays at that point. Your yeast should activate pretty quick within that fermentation, 12 to 24 hours. Alternatively, if you just want to go ahead and set it and forget it, you can hook up a CO2 tank to your keg and just set it to like 30 or 20 PSI, whatever. That will bump it up to 20. Then go ahead and spin this until you basically have it level out at 13 or 14 and it's constantly putting out CO2. But this is super important. This will keep you from blowing up a keg, and this will help you pressure ferment. So that's what we did. We put our spunding valve on, and we got it to the PSI we wanted, and we walked away. The Kveik Lutra is a beast of a yeast. It literally ferments out often in like 2 days. This brew was done in like 48 or 72 hours, somewhere in that span. It flew through fermentation. Starting gravity 1.035, roughly, and 1.000. After we knew it was done, because my tilt hydrometer, what I did was I went ahead and released the pressure till it was like 2 or 3. If you leave the pressure on there at 13 or 14, it's gonna go ahead and carbonate within the keg, within that certain amount of time. So if you go ahead and stave off the pressure, it won't carbonate, although it's not a bad thing if it does. We knew the fermentation was done and we needed to move it from that keg that it fermented in and go ahead and go into a new keg. So that's what I did. Now there's 2 ways you could do this. Generally, you could just go from the out of the keg and into the out of a new keg and literally transfer that way. However, I did not use a floating dip tube, which is something that attaches to the bottom there and floats, as it says, and it gets liquid from the top. Because that pipe or the tube goes to the bottom of the fermenter, whenever you're trying to pull things that have lots of yeast or sediment, you're not gonna easily be able to do that because that yeast and sediment clogs up your out tube. Therefore, you lose the ability to get that from out to out. So I didn't have a floating dip tube, so what I had to do was take off all the pressure, remove every part of the keg lid, and literally auto siphon into the new keg. I didn't love this option, but also it's what I had to do. And what we really did was, we didn't go to a keg. I think we went to a bucket or something. I can't remember what we went to, but we went to a new vessel. We stabilized it with potassium sorbate, metabisulfite, followed up 24 hours later with some honey to back sweeten. I didn't do any acid additions or anything like that. And then we went ahead and kegged it. So now that we've talked about the process, let's go ahead and get a pour of it. Here it is. Not a super clear brew. That's because I basically back sweetened and then immediately kegged it. That's okay, I could have waited a little bit. All in all, the beginning of fermentation to the kegging point was like 5 or 6 days. And then we're now about 5 or 6 days after that. So this is about 12 days since we started it. We're sitting somewhere around 4.5% ABV, which is pretty good. You'll notice that I poured from a bottle. This is currently on tap at my house, but I just went ahead and put some in a bottle just to make the pouring easier. It is currently on tap though. So the Kveik Lutra should be putting off some interesting flavor profiles, not just a great clean fermenter, but it also should have its own little esters and things that it does. I'll put up some specs there, but it is a quality fermenter. And I used orange blossom honey, which is also very, very good. It just has a lot of those really interesting honey notes, of course, when you get the floral side, but then you have the orange, zesty, kind of juicy profile, which is really good. It's just a beautiful, beautiful brew. So crushable. What I love most about this, I love how clean and crisp it is. That's the yeast, that's the honey combo. Fermentation is clean. Again, we're only 11 or 12 days into this, so like super young, but it tastes incredible. We're not super sweet. I've landed around 1.010, I think, as my final gravity. And the carbonation's there. The orange blossom honey is just super fantastic. This yeast and the whole idea of pressure fermentation is super fun. You get some really interesting notes when you use pressure fermented brews. Theoretically, when you pressure ferment, it is supposed to be the same There's some science around here as lagering, and I think Brewlosophy has done some A/B tests and some triangle tests on this, so I'm sure there's some videos out there, but the idea of pressure fermentation is it's supposed to be close to lagering at a cool temp. I don't know specifically with mead if that's true. I'd like to do an A/B test at some point and see if I can do that and detect any differences, but also this is just super easy. So in order to do this, let me recap real fast. You do need a pressure fermentation vessel of some sort. It could be a keg, it could be a Firmzilla, it could be whatever you have. You need a spunding valve or a way to monitor the amount of pressure released from your brew, like this. You're gonna need a yeast that is suited for room temperature stuff generally, or I guess you could do one you could pressure ferment a cold lager as well. I'm not doing that. You need a good yeast. I like the Kveik Lutra. And after that, you just kind of start rocking and rolling. Yes, it requires equipment to do this, but it's very, very good. I would be curious to do this with a higher ABV brew, but also you can't beat something that's 4.5% and only 12 days old. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This has been really fun, a good little test and experiment here. I enjoy getting to do these things. I hope you'll go try it. Maybe try pressure fermentation. If you do, let me know how it goes, because I'm very curious to see your results as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you to my patrons, my YouTube members for the support. You guys are what keep the channel running, because YouTube ad revenue is not great on a very small niche channel like myself. So thank you for watching and participating and being a patron and YouTube member. I hope that you will come back for more videos, and I'll see you in the future with more. Cheers.